So, as I said, I'm just going to try and keep it as a conversation. So the first question I want to ask you, just naturally, conversation is, what are you working on at the moment?
Well, you won't believe this, even I don't believe this, 3 films. I did in 2003, I did an adaptation of Sunset Song, which is a Scottish novel, part of a trilogy called The Scots Quair by Lewis Grassic Gibbon, which I'd seen on television on 1971, black and white every Sunday. That's how I found out about the novel. That was finished in 2003 and we couldn't get it off the ground, and we're going to get it, I think we begin shooting August this year. I've written, and I'm about to write the final draft of an original screenplay about Emily Dickinson because I love her poetry. And I've just finished the final draft on another novel, an American novel called Mother of Sorrows. So there are potentially 3, first time in my life.
That's amazing, because I think of you as a director who's sort of, you know, focusing very minutely on one project at a time and spending years and years on that thing,
Yes,
and then
other people call
one.
it unemployment.
But tell me, going back to how you got into the industry, what did you imagine when you first thought, I could work in film, I could be a director? What did you imagine your future now? At the age you are now, what did you imagine you would be filming now?
No, I never ever thought I would direct. I wanted to act and write. I went to drama school, and while I was there, I heard that the BFI had a production board, so I sent off my first script, which I'd sent everywhere, and everyone had turned it down or not even bothered to return it. And 6 months later, I was asked to go down and see them. They were at Lower Marsh then, behind Waterloo Station. And it was Mamoon Hassan, who has got a terrifyingly cinematic mind, and said, "You have £8,500, not a penny more, you will direct." And I said, "I've never directed before in my life." He said, "Well, now's your chance." And
wow, what an amazing opportunity.
But it was a baptism by fire, because apart from the cameraman, the crew hated it and told me so every single day. It was awful. It was the most awful experience, one of the most awful experiences I had. And I just thought, obviously, I've got absolutely no talent at all, because they was all through the shoot, they were saying, "Well, you know, you should go to close-up here, you should do this," or they would set up shots, and they'd all go. It was awful. It was just awful. Anyway, after 3 weeks and something, I had all this 16mm spaghetti, and the man who had done the sound somehow had become the editor, and it was a disaster. It was utter disaster. And I went back to the board. By this time, Mamoon had left, and Peter Sainsbury had taken over. And I said, "Look, you know, it's a mess. I've wasted £8,500 of your money. I felt so guilty." He said, "No, there's a film in there. I'll find you an editor." And he found me this wonderful woman called Sarah. And she said, "So we'll go through it. We'll go through it slowly." And we got to the end, and I said I wanted it to dissolve to and from this. I said, "Well, I don't think it will work, but we'll do a camera test. We'll do a lab test." Sarah Ellis, she was called. It came back 2 days later. We saw it on the Steenbeck. She said, "You're right, it works." And oh God, I wanted to adopt her legally. I was just so grateful. Anyway, it was over, and I had to go back to drama school to finish my second year, because those days when you got a grant, if you didn't finish your course, you had to repay the whole money, and I just couldn't afford to do that. So I finished my second year, which was just awful, and because I kept on thinking, you know, well, you know, when I looked down the camera, something changed in me. Anyway, we managed to finish the film, and I just thought, well, that's that. And
so you had no notion of a career?
No. I mean,
this was an experiment, or
I just thought
a hobby.
It was so awful. I just thought, obviously, I've got absolutely no talent. Went back to Liverpool, which really was the absolute nadir of my life, because I had to go back to bookkeeping to earn some money. And someone said, "Well, you should apply to film school." So I applied, and I got in at the second attempt, and I got a bursary for those 3 years. And it was there that I sort of knew that's what I wanted to do. But originally I wanted to act, simply because my sisters took me to the movies all the time. There were 8 cinemas within walking distance of our house alone. That was without the 8 in town. And I remember being taken to see The Robe, in 1952, and the man called Jay Robinson, who plays Caligula, as camp as Christmas, but absolutely wonderful. I thought, I want to act. That's what made me want to act. He's walking around this little cocktail.
I was looking at your CV, if that's what you call it, on IMDb. Always inaccurate that it is, and you've got a lot of acting credits.
No, that's
are they all false?
No, they're not true. When I was at drama school, there was a man, I think at the Oldham Rep.
There's another Terence Davies.
Yes, it was, and I've tried to get this taken off because I've never acted professionally.
Well, you know, I had the same problem. I had somebody but I was quite proud of it. I thought I was a Canadian actor at the same time, in a lot of Canadian comedies.
No, but this poor man has done lots and lots of work and he's not getting credited for it. I said, no, it's not me. Because once I'd made even though I thought Children was pretty awful, even at 46 minutes it's too long, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I had no idea whether I would actually ever have a career, because people did not come from the working class and make films. They didn't. They were usually middle class or upper class. And you look at that big revival of so-called social realism at the end of the 50s, they were all made by very, very middle class people. None of them had ever lived in a slum in Salford, and you can tell.
Yes. But I was very interested by what you were saying about how the crew treated you in the way that you said, I want to have the camera here and this shot's going to begin here. Did you have a sort of a natural sense of how you wanted to make the film technically?
No.
Or were you imitating things that you'd seen over through these many visits to the cinema through your life?
I didn't know anything. I didn't know, I was too embarrassed to say action and cut. I was so embarrassed because it seems so silly for a little tiny film like mine. No,
I'm wondering whether this sort of primitivism or whatever you call it, that your sort of inexperience that you had then, did you take some of the approach that you had in that into your film school and then into Distant Voices? I mean, is there some of that? Because it's a very distinctive film.
Well, it's not so much. I think it was instinctive, but at the time all I had was this is how I see it when I look through the camera. That's what I see. Yeah. I didn't know whether that was right or not. Yes. I just didn't, because I'd never done anything before. All I knew is that when I looked down the lens, on a particular lens, and framed it, that felt right. That's all. And that wasn't good enough. I mean, they used to shout at me all the time. It was awful. I just said, well, the only time I defended myself, I said, well, if it's so awful, why did you actually agree to do it? Why? And it all went very, very quiet, just in that English way. Anyway, I finished it and I thought, well, I've obviously just got nothing to say at all. And then I got into film school, as I say, on the second attempt. And that was when I started to learn about rhythm, by watching films and then analysing them on the Steenbeck. But still, it has to be something that's visceral. It's not because you remember this or that or the other. Any influences have to be subliminal. I was watching, for some reason, because I don't normally watch my work, because I just can't. I've seen it so often in the cutting. And there's a shot in Long Day Closes where this lad is between all these women. And I put on a DVD about a week later of The Pyjama Game, because I love musicals. And there's a shot on stage with all these women. I thought, that's where it must have come from. I had no idea. But as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's where it's come from. But you don't know where those influences are. What should happen is that you should react to them, absorb them, and then they come out of you refracted. And that's the best way, because you can't imitate it. You can't.
So something like the very, very distinctive and beautiful opening of Distant Voices in the hallway and the sound of the children coming down the stairs. How did that idea come to you? Do you remember?
I discovered when I was about 18, when we just got our first television set. Over 4 nights, Alec Guinness read from memory the whole of the 4 quartets. I was absolutely knocked out. I didn't understand them at all, but I went out and bought them. In fact, I read them once a month. Because it's about the nature of time and memory, about many other things, but principally about the nature of time and memory. And what I wanted to try and do was say, look, this is not linear. And again, half of it's conscious, but a lot of it is subconscious. How do you do that? You can easily conjure up an era simply by using something like the shipping forecast, not only because of its mantra-like quality, but the way in which it's delivered. They don't speak like that anymore. Fair hour, chromatia, forties, winds freshening south to southeast, moderate to poor visibility, with some fog banks. Actually, isn't this erotic? I mean, I have no idea what it meant. But it's as soon as you hear it, it says straight away it's the 1950s. You can't read it anything else. As anything else. Therefore, how do you get over the fact that you're not going to tell it linearly? I have no idea where the camera travelling down the hallway and turning around 180 degrees. I had no idea where that came from. But
so it wasn't a conscious thing that this is the way I'm going to tell people the kind of film that this is. This is the way I'm going to tell people that it isn't going to be a linear film and that it's going to be a film about memory. But do you remember puzzling about how should I open the film, or was that an image that just came to you, or a scene that came to you fully formed?
It was the shipping forecast that came to me, and that's what I knew what the shots were. But I mean, when I had them coming down the stairs without seeing them, someone said to me, well, you are going to put on the screen, aren't you, the treads depressing like the Invisible Man? I said, no, I'm not. They just come down the stairs, all right, so that you don't know where you are. Are you in present day or are you in the past? And then you dissolve and you clearly are not in real time. And then you see them all standing there. You know, what are they doing? And it's a very simple device, really. You know, there's only two ways to tell.
It's elegant and simple, but then the best ideas always are elegant and simple.
But it's very, very simple. You know, most stories fall into one category or the other. See the opening of, say, Mildred Pierce. You know, you had two shots. Zachary Scott falls over and says, Mildred, Mildred. Now, it can't be Mildred Pierce who's killed him, because otherwise there's no film. Therefore, who has killed him? Or you just hear the shots and he falls on the floor and doesn't say anything. Then we still find out who killed him at the end. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. And it's like music. It should be like music. I'm not a musician, but you can follow a musical argument. You can follow it emotionally. You don't have to know whether in the fourth movement it gets back to its home key. You don't need to know that, as long as you respond to what you're seeing. And if it's visceral, and cinema has to be visceral, it has to be something that is felt and then thought about, not the other way around. Content dictates form. If it's the other way around, it's dead. It's just dead. And so but it was all those things that I'd been taken to see when I was a child. My first movie at 7 was Singing in the Rain. I mean, what an
How lucky are you?
Yes, absolutely lucky me. To see that as your first film, not only in colour, but this fabulous music as well. It's still thrilling, no matter how many times.
I think it's probably the best film ever made, I think.
Yes, easily.
Genius.
It just happens to be a great musical as well.
Yeah. So when you went to film school, and you were developing your filmic technique, your style, writing these scripts, what films were you watching? There must have been films from that period that you admired and that were, if not directly influential, at least sort of things that you thought, oh, I'd like to make something like that. That's the terrain I'd like to occupy. What were you watching? Well,
there were things like The Pumpkin Eater, which is a very fine film, probably the best screenplay that Pinter ever wrote, a wonderful performance by Anne Bancroft. We still had an industry then. It was things like that. It was parts of, like The Whisperers is another very good film.
I don't know The Whisperers. What's that?
It's about this old woman whose son steals money and stashes it in her house. It's a heartbreaking performance by Edith Evans. It breaks your heart. Again, written by Brian Forbes. League of Gentlemen is a wonderfully witty film. You know, to have the opening shot is, you know, there's a manhole. The manhole cover comes out, and out comes Jack Hawkins in tie and tails. And it's a wonderful idea. Whistle Down the Wind was a lovely, lovely, charming film, and many others which were of passing interest. But as I say, it's never conscious. It can't be. If it's conscious, then it's dead. It's deadening, because you can't recreate that. You can only think, wouldn't it have been wonderful to have worked on Counterhearts and Coronets, which is the greatest comedy ever made. It's even Some Like It Hot can't touch it. It's utterly perfect. It's utterly, utterly perfect.
So I've been trying to think of other British films and even foreign films which have the same preoccupation with memory and use of music and non-linear structure as you have in this film. And funnily enough, the only filmmaker who comes close to doing anything at all similar to me is Humphrey Jennings. It feels to me like there's maybe that Listen to Britain is maybe the great grandfather of, in some way, of Distant Voices. I don't know whether that's something that's ever occurred to you.
Oh, it's a huge influence. It's one of the truly great pieces of poetry. It's poetry. I mean, it's just utter poetry. Of course, that sinks into you. You can't not. How could you not respond to that great work? Probably the greatest documentary that's ever been made, I think, because it captures what it was like to be British at a time when we were about to be invaded.
And in a very delicate and non-verbal way. I think that's the thing.
But I mean, he creates this extraordinary civilized land without ever saying a word. You know, you just feel that these people are decent. You know, and what they're fighting against is so indecent and evil. Will they win? And when it was made, we didn't know whether we were going to be invaded or not. But there are lots of other things as well. I mean, the Padre Padrone was had a huge impact on me. So did Psycho. I think Psycho is the greatest of all Hitchcock's film. It's just a masterpiece, and it changes point of view 8 times, and you don't actually even know it. It's that good. So there are all sorts of things like that. And bad musicals. I love bad musicals as well. When they're terrible, there's something wonderful about. Oh no, that's a
good musical, is it? I don't know about that.
Something like Mother Wore Tights. I mean, that's one great number in it, Kokomo, Indiana, and it's worth the whole 1.5 hours just for that number. Wonderful.
Well, I suppose if you look at, especially those classic Hollywood musicals and the way that they were made, they were the closest to experimental film, I suppose, coming out of the Hollywood system, weren't they? Because you could have such heightened emotions, you could have such surreal set pieces for a musical to happen, you can break into song at any moment, all the usual conventions of kind of film storytelling fall away and imagination is let loose. And I suppose this, in a very, very different British way, that's what you were doing in Distant Voices, isn't it? You're breaking all the rules.
Well, it didn't feel like that. I mean, it didn't, honestly. It still doesn't. But no, we can't make musicals in this country. We can't.
Well, it is sort of a musical as well. There's a lot of music. Well, how much of the running time of the film is music? I didn't tot it up, but it's a lot.
Not in the classic sense of a musical.
No.
I think Distant Voices still lives as a film with music, which is not the same. You know, I mean, you look at, say, Singing in the Rain. I mean, that number is only shot from 8 positions, and it goes back to one of the positions. It's actually nine cuts, but 8 positions. You know, and just the exuberance of it, and the utter magic of it. I was given a facsimile of Meet Me in St. Louis, which is the first great musical, and I was reading it. I could hardly believe that I was reading that script, and it came to one. I'll never forget it as long as I live. It said exterior day trolley car, and somebody had written on the margin, perhaps a song here, and they wrote the trolley song.
So let's talk a little bit about the production of the film. How did you get the money together to make it, and also maybe you'd explain to me a bit about why it was made over 2 years in the way it's made. So there's the two sections, Distant Voices, Still Lives, were made with apparently 2 years separated.
That's right.
Correct? Can you explain how that happened?
Well, what happened was the trilogy had finished after 10 years, and they sent it to America. Where it got very mixed reviews because, you know, then it was at the height of Glad to Be Gay, and the trilogy is not about that, and people were pretty vicious about it and didn't want to see it. I came back, but I'd never ever been to America before, and I found myself walking through Central Park thinking, God, you know, I'm in Central Park, and this little cinema where they were showing my film, they showed it twice. First night I had a cue, my first cue, and the second night I had my first demonstration. These daughters of the American Revolution or something said, you know, it was filthy, you shouldn't go and see it. So I came back
That's success, isn't it?
Very chastened. I came back very chastened. And I went into the BFI. By this time, Peter Sainsbury had taken over. And I just want to say thank you for sending me, because it was a very mixed trip, but I'd never been to America before. And he said, we've decided to commission you to do a feature. And I said, oh God, well, thanks, when do you want me to do it? Right now. So I wrote Distant Voices first. And then when we finished it, they were, by this time, Colin McCabe had taken over and said, we'd like to put it into...
So Distant Voices, so the first half of the film, was commissioned separately to...
Yes.
But it was commissioned as a long short or as a feature?
No, they just commissioned, they didn't give me a specific
They didn't say
time.
what length it had to be?
No, they didn't. I said, well, please don't put it out as a short. I said, I think there's another part to it. Would you finance the second part? And they said yes. There were some people who didn't want to do it on the board, because there always is, some people didn't think it was political enough. And I said, but I'm not a political filmmaker. I'm not. I'm interested in stories that have got nothing to do with politics. I got the money after 2 years.
So you made Distant Voices, it was completely finished, and then you started again to do the second half of it. That's extraordinary. I don't think there's another example of that I can think of.
They wouldn't allow you to do it now.
No.
They just wouldn't.
But you'd finished the film, did you actually have a finished print of it, or did you not go that far? Did you have a finished print of the first half? Wow. And so then you went back to them, you asked for more money to complete it, to make it into a feature, and did you get all the same crew back together again?
Most of them. There were some changes inevitably, but no. As I say, when I think about it now, I wouldn't have the nerve to do it now. But no one would say yes. No, they just wouldn't.
But why do you think? Was it in the process of making the first film that you realised the necessity of making the second? Did the first feel incomplete as you were making it?
No, I knew after I'd finished Distant Voices that it needed something else. I just didn't know what it was, but I knew it needed something else as a balance to it, because it felt unfinished.
Yes.
And I said, this is what it should be. And they went along with it. Thank God, God bless them.
Yeah.
They did.
So to talk a bit technically about the film, do you storyboard? It's a very, very visually precise film. It feels like it's all been boarded. It's not.
No, only for one very simple practical reason: I can't draw. So I write the shots as I see them, and then I remember the shots.
So you just remember the shots. So
yes,
you have the script as an aid memoir. To what degree of detail are you imagining those shots? So are you imagining the figurines and the wallpaper, or the position of the characters within the shot? Do you know that kind of detail?
It's a mixture of both. You know what the shot is, but obviously the people who dress it have got to have their say and the look of the film. So we do tests beforehand so that we know what the look is, and then you have to rely on them. You get on the set, and you think, no, it'd be much better if we just came over here by a centimetre, or that we don't need that. Play the rest on the two shot. That's something that you do as you're making the film, because it's got to be organic. But I write the shots as I see them, but you can't write in texture. You can't. If you say, look, the whole texture should be within the range of brown, that can go up to pink and down to very dark brown. It's a wide palette. So we always do tests first, A, for the look, and B, for the ratio.
Right. So, so for instance, take an example from Distant Voices, when Pete Postlethwaite's character, the father, when he beats up his daughter who's asked for the money to go to the dance, and initially we only introduce him by his legs and his jangling pockets, a wonderful introduction, and then you cut to this low angle of him with the chair, I think it's a chair, isn't it, beating her. Did you know exactly that was how you wanted to show the moment of violence, that it was going to be in that single shot? You weren't going to see a reaction of the girl?
Well, it's difficult to say yes or no. You see the shot, and then he walked into it, and I thought it's much more interesting You know, was just
so those sort of things are somewhat organic.
Yes, but you know what it's roughly going to be, and sometimes very precisely what it's going to be. But something happens like that, and you think it's best if we just see his legs, nothing else, and then we cut to him. But we don't show what we don't see him actually hitting her, because it's much more shocking when you don't see violence. I mean, and I can't watch violent films because my father was so violent. And people have said to me, "Oh, it's terribly violent." You know, as you no, it's not. You don't actually see anything. You actually don't. And that's what makes it all the more shocking, because it's counterposed with, you know, taking a chance on love. But what you've got to do, and this is because of money and time. You've got to be able to husband those resources. Someone, you say, I want this, and they say, no, you can only have 25 extras. You can't have 57. You've got to know that. And okay, how do you shoot it so that it looks crowded? Those are practical things. You know, sometimes you say, no, it's got to be this. And when we have this shot, there's got to be a lot of activity into it. We just can't get away with it. A few people. Sometimes you can, but that's a practical thing. That's something that happens when you're shooting.
What I always find when I'm filming is that the thing that I stick my neck out for and say, no, we have to have that crane, or we have to have those 50 extras, is always the scene that I cut. And I don't know whether that's just me and my bad luck, or whether that's a sort of typical filmmaker thing. Do you ever find that? How much do you cut out of the films when after you've shot? How much do they represent the script? How much?
Not that much. But ironically, the last film, Deep Blue Sea, we did this. We shot it in 23 and a half days. Because that's all the time we had. And the last day was very long, and they were exhausted. I said, look, let's just forget it. You know, it's just, you're exhausted. Florian, the cameraman, said, no, we've got to do it. I said, okay, fine. And that, ironically, was the scene that we actually cut. Because it was just one beat too many.
But it wasn't because it was you could tell everyone was tired, or it was technically poor, and it was just actually, it wasn't necessary.
It wasn't necessary.
So something in your subconscious was saying to you, actually, I don't really need this.
Probably.
You probably knew you should have cut it in the script.
But in the script it works. But when you're watching a film at 25 frames per second, it's not the same as reading. It's just not. It's a completely different experience. And it's about capturing the small, fleeting things. There's a scene again towards the end of Deep Blue Sea where Freddie goes to the door with his, and he goes to get his hat, misses it once, misses it twice, gets it 3 times. Of course that's the take you use, because it's something that's not rehearsed, it's absolutely organic, and it makes it even worse when you're going to leave someone. And that tension of where you could hear a pin drop, and neither want the other to leave, and it seems to go on forever. But that's serendipity, that's sheer luck. It's sheer luck. And sometimes when someone does something, you think, I'm not going to tell them, because they'll then become conscious of doing it. And when they become conscious of doing it, it then becomes vocally or visually dead. But when they do little things like that, and you capture the moment, that's thrilling.
With Distant Voices, it feels like there's two set pieces, I suppose, which are, I imagine, more expensive than anything else in the film. The explosion sequence where you have the children out looking for firewood and running down the street, and suddenly it feels like we're in quite a big scale action movie there. And there's the wind is being blown out. It's quite dramatic, and then there's the beautiful, I guess, almost balletic shot of the two men falling through the glass. I mean, those look like they must have been, there's stunt men presumably. There's you've had to try those out several times. Expensive scenes to do, aren't they?
It took an entire day.
Yeah.
just to get those. God, I thought it would never.
But there are wonderful, iconic moments. I mean,
but at the time, and you think, oh God, 4 hours has gone by. God, will we ever get this? The longest though was actually on. Can't even think of the title now. Oh God, Long Day Closes. Christ on the Cross Turning. That took 9 hours to set up and shoot. And funnily enough, we got it on the first take. But we did. No, the video assists those days were not very good, so you couldn't tell.
You couldn't really see.
But it took 9 hours because it was on a huge gyroscope. It was doing different things at the same time.
Do you miss the sort of the purity of shooting on film and the magic of that moment? You don't really know what you've got on film, and then
It is
obviously
exciting.
on digital, you know what you've got. You're seeing it right there. Or even with very good video assist, you sort of know what you've got.
But no, the time that is thrilling when you actually see it on a big screen. That's when it's thrilling, because you see everything then. And that is rather wonderful. That is wonderful, I must say.
Do you project your rushes? Did you project the rushes for distant voices, or did you?
No, we saw them
On a Steenbeck?
We saw them in a mixture of a Steenbeck and in this porno cinema.
Porno cinema in Liverpool.
No, in Liverpool, yes.
That was the cheapest projection possibility.
Yes, absolutely.
So you mentioned a couple of times that you like to test a lot before you film. What are you testing? You're testing film stock in the days when it was film stock. You're testing color. Can you describe what sort of things you're?
It's looking at the ratio to begin with, if the ratio is correct or not. Then texture.
And how do you tell if the ratio is correct or not?
Well, it's an instinctive thing. You think it's got.
So do you do these tests with the actors in full costume, or what are you doing?
No, you just do any test. Look at anything with a bit of material or a bit of interest in a wall. It doesn't matter. That's how you find out what ratio you want to use. Then I've usually talked to the cameraman and the costume designer and the production designer about its look, about its texture. And then while we're doing those tests for lenses and the ratio, we're doing tests for that as well, but never with actors. Never.
I mean, it's very distant voices. Like all your work is very color controlled. I mean, it seems between the design department, the costume design department, the camera, everything is very, very color controlled. How does that come about? Is that
Well, that came about because of the bleach bypass process, which had been used first by Michael Radford in 1984. But the bias to that was blacks and blues and greys and reds, so that it looked like the war. I didn't want that range. I wanted it in the tonal ranges of brown, and so we did those tests without any kind of filter, and it looks actually very cold. It really does look cold. I said, well, it's got to be warmed up. So we used various filters to just simply warm the bleach bypass process. You see it now on television all the time, and
it's also easy to fake these things up now, isn't it?
And it's never right. It's never right, because it's just, let's drain all the colour out. Well, it's not about just draining the colour out. When I was growing up in the 50s, primary colour you very rarely saw. You saw red at Christmas because of Santa Claus's outfit. You had red, blue and green and yellow paper in school that was gummed, and you cut out shapes. But in ordinary life you saw very little primary colour. So if someone did wear something that had primary colouring, like one of my sisters wore this wonderful dress with little cherries on it, it looked breathtaking, because it was unusual, with a little red bolero jacket. I thought she looked like Ava Gardner. But so I remember what it looked like, but also I remember what the 50s felt like. And it's that feeling of texture that's important, that where you had just a fire reflecting on cheap furniture, but the cheap furniture was polished, and it made it seem so rich and warm and comforting. But it's trying to remember how it felt.
Do you ever regret that there's no smell in cinema?
I think that's probably a good thing.
Because I think
10 people in a house with only an outside lavatory, smell-o-rama, you can do it.
But you do feel like that's, you almost are smelling it, because it's so fully realised, I suppose, and the detail is all there. So for what's missing, it is. It's the smell. What have they had for breakfast? Tell me a bit about the casting, particularly Pete Postlethwaite, who I guess had already done a bit at this stage, hadn't he? He was already somewhat.
He was quite a name, and I'd seen him in Private Function, I think.
Okay.
And he's the only member of the cast who actually looked like my father.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the reason I chose him. I thought he could do it, but he made it very clear that he wasn't wild about it. I have to say, the audition, he was actually very rude and said, I want to go.
Because it wasn't the kind of film that he wanted to do?
I don't, and I said to my producer, well, he obviously, doesn't want to do it, you know, because he looked me up and down, and I thought, I know exactly what you're thinking. And I said, well, let's start looking for someone else. And my producer said, no, I'll get him to see the trilogy.
Yeah.
He saw the trilogy and then he agreed to it. But I have to say, we did not get on.
Was that because he wasn't used to this kind of filmmaking, or was it because you just saw the world differently? You were just different.
There are some people you don't get on with, and you can't alter that. It's just.
But do you think that's partly? I mean, obviously, he is playing your father, and you have, I guess, complicated feelings about your own father. Do you think that's part of the reason you cast him? You cast someone that actually you knew you weren't going to get on with?
No, I just think he could do it. He happened to look like my father. That was all. But I did have a discussion with him. I said, well, no, would you turn down Richard III because people will think you go around killing children? Come on, that's a weak argument. You know, you're an actor. Actors act. They act good, bad, and indifferent people. That's their job. You know, I mean, I can't be doing with all that. You know, angst. You know, at the end of the day.
So he felt the character was too dark.
No, he didn't say that. He was just. It was just reluctant all the time, and after a while, it just gets you down. You think, well, why did you say yes?
But he gives a brilliant performance.
Sorry, yes, he does. Yeah,
and do you think part of that? Do you think part of that was some sort of method approach? Was there something? Was he being particularly difficult because that was who the character was?
No, he wasn't difficult. He was. There's just some people you don't get on with.
Yes.
You can't explain it. Just there are other people that come on and they're on for a day. You think, oh, I wish they were on for longer. We just didn't get on. It's a great performance, I think. We just didn't get on. But at the end of the day, I'm afraid I got no time for all this angst-ridden stuff. It's only acting, it's only pretend. It's not mining coal, it's not a cure for cancer. And if you were in an ordinary job and came in and said, like I was for 12 years as a bookkeeper, I feel a bit frail today, your boss would say, there's the door, don't bang it as you go out. That's what you'd be told in an ordinary job. And at the end of the day, it is a job for which they're well paid. And so I've got no time for all that angst stuff. You think, if it's that angst-ridden, do something else.
What about the singing? Did you cast people deliberately who could sing?
No, I said to all of them, can you carry a tune? And they said yes.
Of course they would. They always say yes.
No, but they sang at the audition.
They sang at the audition.
So they could sing. And in fact, Frida was so good at imitating my mother, because my mother did some of the songs for the playback, that when my mother died, my sister said, oh, well, you know, can we play something from the film? I said, yeah. She said, we'll choose My Thanks to You. And she said, that was Mum you used in the film. And I said, no, that's Frida. That's Frida. She imitated my mum. And that was lovely, because she really did sound like my mum. Mum had a lovely voice.
So your mum was still alive when you made the film, huh? What did she think of it?
Oh, my family didn't say anything. They never say anything about my films. They don't say anything. So I never know what they think. But she did say, he's told the truth. That's what she did say. But you never get any reaction from them. I never do. I've stopped asking that because they all get embarrassed.
But they go religiously, presumably, and buy a ticket to go.
Well, yes, but I think they go. I think they go out of feeling of duty rather than wanting to say so. Because if you weren't, I weren't your brother.
Because I'd be very curious to know, as people,
as
obviously film lovers, your family were obviously all film lovers, but in a very different type of film, they were going to see.
They grew up with popular cinema, you know, and they probably.
So I'm curious to know what they thought of their life refracted through this very unusual form of cinema.
Well, it's impossible to know because they never ever said ever. They never have said, even with the films that are not about.
Did you have any trepidation about showing the world your own family life? Was there any point where you thought, actually, is this a good idea?
No, I didn't, because I was more worried about their response to the trilogy, because it was about, you know, being gay and hating it and being Catholic and all that. And they were shocked by that. I know they were. They didn't have to say anything. I knew they were terribly shocked about it. But the films, no, they suffered so terribly. My father was so violent, and they did suffer terribly, and I wanted to record that. Not that it makes any difference. It gives no meaning to suffering. But I wanted to say, look, they went through this, and it was awful. It was much worse in real life than it was on the screen, I can tell you. Had I put everything in, nobody would have believed it.
How old were you when your father died?
I was 6.5.
So it was your elder siblings who experienced the worst of it.
Yes, but I mean, I had it too. I mean, I was 5, I think. I ran into the house. I was 5 years old. Made a noise. He just kicked me from one end of the flat to one end of the house to the other. Thought, I won't make that mistake again. He went to chop my mother's head off in front of me. You know, you can't forget those things. So he was very, and then he died of cancer at home over 2 years. And those days, you were only allowed a certain amount of morphine, and after that, they wouldn't give you any more. And so when the morphine wore off, he was even more violent. It was, the last 2 years was just awful, just awful.
Do you think that there's I guess, a suggestion in the film that this male violence goes on generation after generation in this community anyway? Is that something that you still believe? Do you think that this male violence against women, against children, because the suggestion is, I guess, that the children are behaving the same way when they're married and the same way towards their wives, and I guess towards
I don't
their
think
children.
it's as extreme, but I mean, my brother's...
There's something abusive, though, you're suggesting. That
my eldest brother was very Victorian, had a very good heart. He was a docker, but he was very Victorian. You know, the man ruled the house. You know, that was because that's what he was brought up with. He was brought up to fight anybody he'd fight anybody when he was a young man. And I don't know. I don't know whether it's revisited them or in a diluted form. I don't know, because I never got married. But yes, they
But that is the suggestion in the film, isn't it?
But they did behave badly on occasions, my brothers, yes. But they had the counterbalance of my sisters, because my sisters would just tell them off and say, you knock it off. And they were told in no uncertain terms that this was not acceptable behaviour. Even though they weren't married to my sisters, my sisters were prepared to say, you're out of order, don't do it again. So there was that counterbalance. My father didn't have that counterbalance. But if you see violence as a child, either you indulge in it when you grow up, or you're almost... I'm horrified, but I can't watch it at all. You know, I don't know why people make violent films, because my attitude is, be in a room with someone who's really violent just for a day. It's not cool, it's not funky, it's not entertaining, it's terrifying. Try it sometime. I don't want to see people being shot or tortured. I don't want to see it. You know, and I can never understand this drooling about violence. I've never understood it, because I experienced it when I was very young, and I thought...
many films are violent. Why do you think so many films today are violent? It's obviously reflecting something, some desire, some need, or simply reflecting reality.
I think it's sheer voyeurism. You know, it looks good and it's sort of sexy. And because it was.
But do you think it's something to do with the fact that
in a very sexy way? It's made to look sexy, and that's what's so unpleasant about it, because it's not.
But
you
is
get
it also
hit
to do
by
with,
someone.
is it also to do with the fact that people of your generation and your brothers and sisters had experienced in one way or another the Second World War, had a direct experience of the consequences of it, even if they weren't in the war themselves? You know, they'd seen fathers dying, brothers dying. They knew the horrors of warfare. But perhaps recently, my generation, the generations younger, have forgotten that, and therefore somehow it's a way of simulating what violence does to you, because maybe as human beings we need to experience violence.
Yes, but why drool over it? That's a big difference. And I won't watch it. I just won't. If it's fun, I get up and walk out. I don't want to see it, because it's not sexy. It's not funky. And if you're getting some kind of emotional thrill by doing it vicariously, there's something very sinister about that.
So after you'd made Distant Voices and then Long Day Closes, because those are your two autobiographical films, and the trilogy, obviously, and then you haven't seemed to have been tempted to go back and make anything else that's autobiographical. Did you feel that you'd closed that chapter?
Yes, but there's things that are always bits of autobiography. I'm obsessed with windows, for instance. in everything. Don't know why, but I'm obsessed with the nature of screen time. I'm obsessed with the way music works on a moving image. You know, those things will always be there autobiographical, because I can remember going to see The Big Country and being knocked out by that score. It's not a very good film, but God, what a great score. What a great score for Psycho, and those wonderful opening credits. You know, you never forget things like that. But travelling shots with music are thrilling, like the opening sequence of Big Country with the Joe Morros behind it. It was by Saul Bass, who did also Psycho, and it's fabulously thrilling. I mean,
are there any films being made now that you, in the last few years, that you particularly admired?
yes, there are two, and they're both French. Bertrand Tavernier's Laissez-Passer, which I think is wonderful, and a film by Denis Decour called The Page Turner. I think they're
I don't
wonderful.
know that one.
They're wonderful.
What's it about? What's The Page Turner about?
It's about this girl who's
The Page Turner for a pianist.
for a pianist. But it's a revenge tragedy. It's absolutely wonderful, but told as if he's doing a post-mortem. It's just wonderful.
I'll have to go and check that one out. Terence, thank you very much. Let's call it a day there.
Thank you.
You were fantastic. That was great. I hope we didn't wear you out.
No.